Welcome to Root of Ramose, a poetry writing series in which we observe the mechanics, aesthetics, and meaning of the greatest founding texts of the Western poetic tradition. Now, of course, the Epic of Gilgamesh is certainly an Eastern text. However, the Epic of Gilgamesh was definitely within the general consciousness of the Greeks when they were crafting their great epics in the first millennium BC. This is clearly seen when we compare the thematic subjects such as divinity, combat, and virtue, and see how they're illustrated in both the Epic of Gilgamesh and, say, the works of Homer. It's for this reason that I've decided to explore the Epic of Gilgamesh as the first installment of this series. So in this video, we're going to be going over the setting of the Epic of Gilgamesh, how and why the epic was written over 4,000 years ago, some of the Mesopotamian history of linguistics, the late 1800s discovery of the Gilgamesh tablets, and then the modern archaeological discoveries of the epic's setting in Uruk, and then a brief note on how we can best prepare ourselves for when we do read the Epic of Gilgamesh. As always, there are going to be timestamps available, so feel free to use that at your own discretion. So what do we know about the setting of the Epic of Gilgamesh? This story takes place in ancient Mesopotamia in Uruk, otherwise known today as Iraq. Based on the Sumerian king list, the city of Uruk was said to be founded by King Umikar approximately 4500 BC. From archaeological findings, we've been able to determine that Uruk was the first major civilization in the world. At its peak, it was home to around 80 to 90,000 citizens. One way this was made possible was through the use of a very intricate canal system that ran throughout the entire city. Worship was incredibly important to the people of Uruk. The Sumerian religion had a creation story that was founded on 4 main deities. Each one was closely related to an aspect of nature. You had Namu, the primordial sea, An, sky, Kai, earth, and Elil, rain, wind, and storm. As the Sumerian society became more city-oriented, different districts were believed to have been occupied or overseen by different deities. Inanna, the goddess of love, fertility, and war, would eventually become one of the more popular deities worshipped by the Uruk people. As their civilization grew, temples were built in order to provide a dwelling place for the gods, and Uruk is actually the originating place of the ziggurat. Sumerians did believe in the conception of heaven and hell. They believed that gods resided in heaven and that the underworld, or Kur, was where human souls went after they died. Regardless of how they lived their life, everyone went to the netherworld. Their conception of the underworld was that it was a dark, shadowy version of Earth, and that the only thing that the soul had to consume was dust. It's for this reason that it became a practice. If you had a deceased family member, you would go to their grave and perform a ritual called a libation, where you would pour an offering of a drink or an oil or grain onto the grave. There'd usually be like a clay container, and that would be given to a deity in the hopes that the departed would gain favor in the afterlife. Other than that, in ancient Mesopotamia, magicians and witchcraft was very much a part of daily life. While there was certainly social stratification in Uruk, many citizens practiced magic in some form. From archaeological findings, we have been able to uncover tablets that actually explain how to perform rituals for exorcisms, practicing divination, protection spells, as well as lists of stones and their magical or spiritual properties. Additionally, over time, archaeologists have found in Babylonian homes these small idols or statues, and they usually find it toward the entrance, buried under the ground. And it's believed that those idols were used as a form of protection or deterrence against evil spirits. It's important to note that as empires would come to power in Mesopotamia over the centuries, that each ruler would believe that their coming to power was a work of divinity. Their position and where they were was due to their given god or goddess of worship. The Epic of Gilgamesh is the story of Gilgamesh, a ruler of Uruk, and his search for eternal life. At the beginning of the story, we're told that Gilgamesh is 2 parts god and 1 part human. And because of this, he is incredibly strong and also a great warrior. The story begins with the citizens actually lamenting the cruelty and barbarism that Gilgamesh exercises against his own people. And there is a plea to the gods that they send someone down to challenge Gilgamesh and to help protect the people. The story then features the creation story of Enkidu, the budding friendship between Enkidu and Gilgamesh, some quests that they go on together, and then the combating powers of divinity, as well as questions of virtue and morality that arise over the course of the story. It's important to note that the figure of Gilgamesh is believed to have actually existed, and that it's over the coming centuries that he would eventually become deified. He is actually accredited to building the walls of Uruk. Gilgamesh is found on the Sumerian king list, and it's estimated that his rule was somewhere between 2800 to 2500 BC. The body of Gilgamesh is said to be buried under the Euphrates River. In spite of all of the tablets and information that's been uncovered, some believe that Gilgamesh never existed and that the epic is pure myth. Others believe that, sure, Gilgamesh was the king, but much of the epic was exaggerated over time. Personally, I think that Gilgamesh had to have existed and that he must have done something to gain the acclaim that would have the entire Babylonian region talking about him like centuries after his rule. Why would they choose to deify only one king? There were a lot of kings over the years, over the centuries in that area. He had to have done something to gain the acclaim to have such a widely known story that was retold in multiple languages. With all of that in mind, then we get to the question of, well, how did the epic survive 4,000 years, and then why was it that it's only been in the last 150 years that we rediscovered the Epic of Gilgamesh? So we know that the Epic of Gilgamesh was originally shared in spoken word approximately around 2300 BC in both Akkadian and Sumerian. This area of Mesopotamia would be known today as mostly centered in Iraq, but also extending into Iran, Syria, and Turkey. The Epic of Gilgamesh became the first story recorded. It's found in several different languages on clay tablets in cuneiform script, most prominently found in Sumerian and Akkadian. Now, the oldest tablets were actually found in Sumerian, dating from approximately 2100 BC. Unfortunately, due to the instability of the ruling leadership that would constantly be changing over the centuries in Mesopotamia, the spoken language of Sumerian would die out by the time of the first Babylonian dynasty. So in spite of having found many of these tablets, Sumerian has no spoken equivalent alive today, and that makes trying to decipher those tablets very difficult. However, we have found Akkadian tablets of the Epic of Gilgamesh, and the Akkadian tablets are the most complete collection of the epic that we have so far uncovered, and it features 12 fragmented tablets. Fortunately, because Akkadian is a Semitic language, it's actually very closely related to Hebrew and Arabic, so we've had a lot easier time deciphering those texts. And the Akkadian tablets that we've uncovered so far date from approximately 700 BC. Okay, so we have the Sumerian texts as well as the Akkadian texts, but why? What happened to the Sumerian speakers? The beginning of the first known ancient empire of Mesopotamia was the Akkadian Empire. This empire was first established and then ruled by the king Sargon the Great. The conquests of Sargon of Akkad were extensive. In only 40 years, the territory of the Akkadian Empire grew exponentially. There was approximately a 200% increase in territory over the course of the following century, because Akkadian was the spoken language of the courts as well as the ruling class of the empire. The language developed a more widespread use amongst both the city-states of the lower Mesopotamia as well as much of the northern Mesopotamia. It's also believed that as the empire conquered surrounding territories, there was a period of time in which the empire enforced a use of the Akkadian language. This would obviously help create stability and unification amongst the territories that were being consolidated under the control of the empire. Well, I could go into all of the different dynasties that would come into power and then be overturned by other empires. I think really the most important point to take home is that from the beginning of the Akkadian Empire to the following centuries, the Sumerian language would be steadily in decline in use. As mentioned earlier, by the time of the Babylonian dynasty, Sumerian had completely died out as a spoken language. However, the Babylonians still wanted to maintain Sumerian. It was known that the Sumerian language was the first recorded language in ancient Mesopotamia. At that point, the Sumerian language had been in written use for over 1,000 years. Many of the important administrative documents, as well as spiritual rituals and incantations, had been preserved in Sumerian writing. It's for this reason that the Babylonians believed it was important to maintain the cuneiform script of Sumerian. In their eyes, it was certainly considered a prestigious and sacred written language. And so their scribes would learn how to write the Sumerian language, and many of the tablets that we would eventually find would actually have belonged to scribal apprentices. And so what happened to these tablets? Why were they lost? At this point in my research, I couldn't really find a definitive answer as to why these tablets were left behind in Mesopotamia. I'm assuming that it had something to do with when the Persian Empire invaded Mesopotamia. This would have happened around 700 BC. Granted, while Persia was known to be really open-minded with the territories that they would conquer as far as allowing them to maintain their religion, certainly there would have been other ways in which pressure would have been imposed upon the Babylonians. And so that definitely would explain why there were uprisings by the Babylonian people that were all failed attempts to revolt against the Persian Empire, given that eventually the resources in that area just were depleted and people had to leave. And so if you have the lower class civilians that fled the area because there were no resources, and then you had the upper echelon of that society that all went to war and died in order to get into a position of ruling their land again, if they all died out, then there would have been no reason for anyone to take the tablets with them. This is my best attempt at an explanation for why the tablets were left, but there may certainly be a better explanation for why this occurred. So in 1847 to 51, Austin Henry Layard excavated Sennacherib's palace and found 20,000 clay tablets, and these were sent back to the British Museum, and this actually is the collection that would become the foundation for the study of Assyriology. The first deciphering of the Gilgamesh tablets is actually accredited to British Assyriologist George Smith in 1872. The tablets that he deciphered were actually originated from the library of the Assyrian king Assurbanipal. When Smith deciphered the tablets and realized that one of them contained a Babylonian account of the Great Flood, he lost his mind. There was a witness that said that upon Smith's discovery, he then jumped up and rushed about the room in a great state of excitement, and to the astonishment of those present, began to undress himself. So, after the discovery of the tablet's contents, there was funding provided to Smith in order for him to find the missing fragments. So he then would go on more expeditions to try and uncover more pieces of the fragments. And he actually was able to find more of the flood, so good for him. Additionally, around 1878, the British Museum bought approximately 20,000 Babylonian tablets that had been dug up by the locals and then had been made available for sale. And around this time, Hormuzd Rassam was sent on an excavation of the south of Baghdad, and he had acquired 50,000 tablets in Babylonia. In the following decades after 1872, when the tablets were first deciphered, they were then further collected and translated by people like George Smith, Paul Hopt, and Peter Jensen. Since then, there have only been a handful of individuals that have worked in the process of deciphering the text, and the greatest difficulty for Assyriology, there is just a tremendous volume of tablets and just so few people that actually are skilled in reading it and deciphering it and even handling the tablets. So currently there are still pieces of the tablets that have yet to be found, and we are still missing fragments of the Epic of Gilgamesh in various different cuneiform scripts. So this leads us to ask, what are the more recent discoveries of the Gilgamesh tablets, and what have we discovered about Uruk? In April of 2003, there was an article released by the BBC News stating that archaeologists in Iraq believe they may have found the tomb of King Gilgamesh, the subject of the oldest book in history. That's huge. That would change everything. If we actually found his tomb, that would be crazy. This finding was actually performed by a German-led team of archaeologists. They said that they actually used a magnetization of the soil to be able to see the outlines of the city and the more intricate details that obviously had existed at one point. The most surprising thing that we found was that there were structures already described in Gilgamesh, and we covered more than 100 hectares, and we found a garden structure and field structure as described in the epic. Unfortunately, due to the war, the archaeologists had to halt any further study of the area. We do know that May of 2003, there was a plan to organize security around the site against the threat of pillagers. Apparently that wasn't a successful operation, because in 2021, The Guardian released an article, US to return 17,000 looted ancient artifacts to Iraq. Yeah, apparently items had been smuggled out because of the 2003 invasion. This included the Gilgamesh tablet. That's a lot of artifacts to go missing, and apparently as of 2021 there were still thousands of artifacts that were missing. There is a 2017 World History Encyclopedia article by Osama Shakir Muhammad Ahmed that goes more into depth about the illegal excavations of Mesopotamia and the looting of the Iraq museum that occurred after 2003. He actually has original photos that he's taken of the tablets that he's referring to, and it's actually pretty high definition photos if you want to take a look. It's in the description. Aside from the apparent looting of Iraq, there really hasn't been anything that's been publicly released regarding the tomb of Gilgamesh. It's as if nothing was actually found. And I tried looking at Mr. Fassbender's work, and he has a few documents. There's a document from 2005 that goes over the findings of what Uruk actually looked like. There's like a plan, a floor plan kind of the city. And then there's a repeat of that information in a 2019 document by Fassbender. And it really doesn't provide that much more information than they already released initially. So given the turmoil in the Middle East, no one could really do archaeological digs, but you would think that maybe in the near future, they can start digging, because they've only uncovered 13% of what's there. So there's so much more that we haven't excavated in Uruk, and there's so much more that we might be able to find. I just sort of feel like we should have more information, but I understand why we don't. I think because there's been a silence, there have been people that have come up with their own interpretation of what must have happened to the tomb, and that's very easy to find, and no comment. As modern readers, we have a few different translations of the Epic of Gilgamesh that we can choose to read from. And obviously, as more time passes, we have more fragments of the tablets assembled and deciphered. If you want to see a breakdown of the different translations, there will be a video in the description by Clark Grubb, who does a pretty good brief breakdown of which translations you might want to go with. So I'm personally going to be reading Andrew George's translation from 2000. It has a sizable introduction as well as a map of the area and some timelines that have been really helpful, just understanding early ancient Mesopotamia. Additionally, the book has several different translations of the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now, to touch on the actual reading of the text and how to get the most out of the poetry, given that images were very important in the culture, I definitely think that that will translate with images in the text of Gilgamesh. And so, moving forward, consider the symbolic importance of every image that's presented, and I think that's one area to really kind of hone in on. Additionally, you want to consider the structure of the lines. So generally the verse is composed from stanzas that have two couplets inside of them, but there are times when the structure will actually deviate from that rule, and so there's an intention with breaking from that structure. I think that's an area that will create meaning in the poetic verse of Gilgamesh. Certainly the last question to kind of keep asking yourself as you're reading is, what are the subjects or the themes that are being explored in the text? What does the mere presence of those ideas tell us about the human condition? The fact that we can find them in the earliest written text of humanity, that has to be something that we really try to extract the most meaning out of. This is certainly not an exhaustive list of everything that you should keep in mind when you're reading the Epic of Gilgamesh, but I think it's an open enough starting point anyone can use in order to start reading. So next time on Root of Ramose, I will be providing a textual analysis of the standard version of the Epic of Gilgamesh, He Who Saw the Deep. For that video, I'll go over at least 6 of the first tablets. This video was a lot of research. I used a lot of different sources in order to try and get as much information as I could, enough high quality information as I could, and it really reminded me how much I enjoy researching. And anything else. I hope that the information I provided in this video really helps you to get the background information that you need in order to just feel comfortable as you start reading the Epic of Gilgamesh. Other than that, thank you so much for being here. If you're interested in staying up to date with my uploads, you can feel free to subscribe to my channel. Again, if there's anything that I missed or that I got wrong, feel free to let me know in the comments below. I can also answer any questions that you have. Other than that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.